Good morning. We are starting one of the interviews in the series of the anniversary, 30 years of our Association of Applied Linguistics in Brazil, ALAB, Associação de Linguística Aplicada do Brasil. And today I have the honor of interviewing Professor Jan Blommaert from Tilburg University. Hi, Jan, how are you?
Well, not very well, actually. The routine answer is I'm fine and so on and so on, but the truth is my health is declining very rapidly. So it's good to have this interview now. And do it now, because in a few weeks' time we might not be able to do it again.
Yeah, this is, very difficult to hear, especially because, you're someone who became a friend of, our extended networks of colleagues, in Brazil and elsewhere. But yeah, this is a good sign that you are struggling, every people of their own, personal fight. So it's really good to have you here, and I thank for your, time in being able to talk.
I'm happy to be able to still contribute in this way.
Yes,
very.
You are, yeah, for sure. So Jan, initially, I'd like to point out that your work, over the years has covered many important topics in the study of language in society. In your early career, you did field work in Africa, in Tanzania, and you wrote extensively about literacy and sociolinguistics processes in that field. You produced, a monograph that has been re-edited, and it's excellent. You also engaged empirically, ethnographically with immigrants in Europe. You studied discourses of intolerance, and you engage with nationalist language ideologies in Europe. And more recently, you have looked critically at the transformations of interaction that are brought about these technologies of communication that we use on a daily basis, and you have really pushed for a redefinition of theories and methodologies in the field of language in society vis-a-vis these technological communicative transformations. So,
that's correct.
Yeah, to begin this interview, I'd like to remark that you achieved all this by means of both serious, reading of, brilliant thinkers in the field, not only of linguistics, but also in other disciplines and paradigms. But you also did tireless empirical work, and you continue to do that. As we have limited time in this interview, I'd like to pick just one of these brilliant thinkers that influenced your work, Michael Silverstein, who unfortunately left us a few months ago. And in the past 2 decades, the work of Michael has become very relevant in Brazil. And, as you said in a recent video, his work will likely be revisited in the, time to come. So it's really rich, and there is a lot yet to be unpacked there. And I think that, especially in Brazil, his work, and this extended work that he did with you and other colleagues has potential for us to advance applied linguistics and critical sociolinguistics, pragmatics, etc. So my first question is actually a request of a comment on indexicality, which is a notion proposed by Charles Peirce that Michael redefined, and that became really a major foundation for the study of language as practice. So initially I would ask you, could you unpack a little bit the concept, and especially how it helps us move beyond the view of language as the referential exchange of information between individual speakers?
Sure. But let me first very quickly say something about the preface of your question. The fact that you pointed at the me engaging, with the work of other scholars. It's the thing that I believe we should be more honest about. And I'll be very quick. We stand on the shoulders of others. And whenever we believe we as individuals achieved something in research, it's basically because we researched. So we searched again. We searched the stuff that others before have already, investigated very, very deeply. We should be more honest about it, I think, about the way in which a lot of what we believe is our achievement or other people believe is our own achievement is in fact emerging exclusively, through a very profound and a very honest engagement with their ideas, with their work, and with their thoughts. All right, like Indexicality in the case of Michael. You already pointed out, that he drew from the work of Charles Peirce. A number of other influences were there as well. And then, it gets out in the open. Numerous other people, including me, start writing about it. And that's when it acquires a million new meanings and a million new formations as a tool for research. Now, for me, as a very, very simple way of explaining indexicality, indexicality is the implicit stuff in communication, right? So whenever we communicate stuff explicitly. So we produce words that can be heard, that can be noted down, that can be transcribed. Or increasingly we type them on a keyboard or whatever. That's the explicit part, right? And very often we reduce language to that and meaning to that. Okay. But apart from doing this explicit work, we also produce even more implicit work, right? These words, but also the ways in which we produce them, are grounded in something. They are grounded in an implicit world of unspoken meanings, if you wish, very often called social meaning, and incidentally also indexical meaning. And that includes an incredible range of stuff we could call meaning, like for instance the value we attach to particular like varieties of language. And I hope I have the opportunity to return to that later. But also, for instance, the difference between saying yes and meaning yes. All right. Someone can ask me, did you like the movie? And I can say, yes. Right? In this particular way, with this particular intonation. Right? Now, explicitly, I've said yes, of course. I agreed. And yes, it's a very clear word. Yes or no, black or white, right? So what should be the trouble? Well, the trouble is that I've actually implicitly expressed and communicated, no, I did not really like that movie. All right? So here's the work of indexicality. We have an explicit world of meaning, anchored in grammatical structures, morphosyntax, in the lexicon, and what have you. And then we have a huge, an enormous amount of implicit meanings that are included in the production of the explicit bits. And jointly, they produce the real meanings that we produce in communication. So whenever we communicate, we do more than speaking or writing, right? We express all sorts of things. And it's that richness of expression that is the stuff of indexicality. Now that makes indexicality, of course, a very complicated, very broad notion. Hence the misunderstanding sometimes you can observe in the literature. But at the same time also, it explains a great amount of stuff that cannot be explained, through ordinary linguistics or traditional, content analysis, or things like frequency analysis and so on and so on. And so we need to delve into the ethnographic, the socio-cultural foundations of the people who are using language in order to understand what they really are doing when they make meaning. And what they really do when they make meaning is they organize indexicals. They create indexical order. So they shape a particular order in indexicals that jointly produces meaning. And not just meaning in the sense of the meanings we find in a dictionary, but also meaning in the sense of identity. Like, oh, hang on, this guy knows what he's talking about, right? Or the opposite, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, very often we make great efforts to impress upon other people that we know what we're talking about, while, of course, the real effect of all these efforts is that people are convinced that we are, like idiots or morons who haven't the clue.
Yeah, excellent. It really, strikes me as, smart, this way of framing the indexicality as implicit, because, yeah, it is. In the end, indexicality is pragmatics, the pragmatics of language.
Yeah.
So could you maybe give one example of a past work of yours that engages with this concept?
All of my work engages with the indexicals in a way. But a very clear example, of course, is in the field of asylum applications, work that I did a decade ago, or even, it's more than a decade now. And it was grounded also in the work that I had previously done in Africa. We observed, of course, that an accent in English from Nairobi. Okay, so somebody comes from Nairobi, a local person, right? And he or she speaks English. But of course, English with an accent. There is no English without an accent. So he or she has a Nairobi accent of English. All right. Now, in Nairobi, this particular accent would attribute indexically, would attribute language ideologically, a particular middle-class identity to that person, right? So this particular type of English, the fact that he or she has English at all, right, already attributes a middle-class identity. Now imagine that person now moves to London and seeks asylum, applies for asylum in London, right? The interesting thing is that the exact same accent, which in Nairobi attributed the middle class, as a consequence also an educated identity to that person, is entirely lost in London, right? And very often even reversed to the accent of an uneducated or undereducated immigrant, right? Now linguistically, nothing changes. Right, and also at the level of variationist social linguistics, nothing changes. So we need indexicality in order to understand this change in evaluation, in the value of the same, stuff of language, the same chunks of language that change miraculously, okay, in value. That's an indexical property. And we can only explain it, through indexicality as a fundamental property of the socio-cultural ways in which we use language.
Yeah, that's one of the beauties of language, that always changes as we go, as we move, and it's never the same phenomenon, because it depends on where it's used. So yeah,
Exactly.
another concept that appears throughout your work, just to cite once more Michael Silverstein, is the notion of language ideology. An important premise in this debate is that of language ideologies is that we are never outside ideology. There is no view from nowhere. In this sense, the nationalist observers that you studied in the 90s with your work with Jeff Verschuren, for example, they were ideologically positioned, but so were you scholars studying them. So having this in mind, could you first just define language ideology, just so we move on the debate?
Yeah. Well, in a very simple way, language ideologies are socioculturally grounded ideas about language, widely shared ideas about language, about the way language is organized, about the ways in which we use it, and about the ways in which we should use it. All right, so again, we're looking here not just at one thing, but at a field of objects, much like in the case of indexicality. And of course, these two notions are very, very connected at a very deep level. And so indexicals are language ideological phenomena, all right? And you can only observe language ideologies but by looking at indexicals, at a real, actual, and situated indexicals. But so the idea of language ideologies refers to socioculturally anchored ideas we have about language and about these other aspects of communication that I just gave you. Note that, when I say socioculturally grounded, there may be a suggestion of persistence. So that those are more or less, or should I say, fixed things. No, they're not. They're not fixed at all. They're highly dynamic. They can change. They can change very rapidly. They can change in the course of one event. They can change according to the specific small populations, like micro populations, that we have and are facing. So there's nothing uniform about it. There's nothing stable about it. There's nothing static about it. Which again, as a subject for research, makes it a delicious plate of food, because it's never finished. It's never finished.
Yeah, indeed.
That was one of the greatness about Michael's work, by the way. Yeah? So he offered us notions like indexicality, indexical order, and indeed language ideology and metapragmatics and so on and so on. But these are not just words that refer to single tools in the toolbox or to single challenges in a field of research. They're programmatic. They're absolutely, they redefine a field and create segments within our field of study, that need to be addressed in entirely new ways, in entirely novel ways.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as your empirical examples pointed, we really need to situate those concepts and those ways of thinking in order to really make sense of reality, because reality is grounded, is situated, etc.
And of course, Michael's work as well as mine is profoundly ethnographic in that sense. And so there is no way you can talk about indexicality or language ideology in a non-ethnographic way, because all of it refers to socio-cultural situatedness. And that's a very, very, very specific, a very, situated matter, meaning you can only address it, you can only find out about it, you can only analyze it ethnographically. There is no other way in which you can do that.
Yeah. The second part of my question has to do with the positionality of the linguist, so to say. So in your 2010 book, that great book, The Sociolinguistics of Globalization, you propose a sociolinguistics of language resources as opposed to a sociolinguistics of language, static language, synchronic language, so on and so forth. So it would be
Yeah.
nice if you could tease out, Michael's argument, about, linguists and lay people alike having language ideologies with your own framing of sociolinguistics as the study of language resources.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was a thing that we were about to get lost. This idea, that social linguistics is about concrete resources. It is about the actual like sounds that people produce in real varieties of real languages, and the fact that they do so in real interactions with real other interlocutors and so on and so on. So we were about to lose that insight. And here I need to move a little bit beyond Michael, because Michael was not the only one. I mean, of course, his great achievement was that he offered as a notion of language as an object that was layered, stacked, all right, a fragmented, like, the ideological layer became very, very important there. Now, that meant that we were no longer looking at English or Russian or Chinese as one thing, all right? In the social linguistics of languages, in China, people speak Chinese, all right? No. They use all kinds of resources, specific little bits of resources, all right, that jointly and conventionally, language ideologically, we call Chinese, right? But as soon as you start looking inside Chinese, you begin to discover a world of distinction, of difference, of indexical order, that operates at a micro level as well as a macro level, etc., etc. And so it was an easy sort of notion, social linguistics of mobile resources, because for me it was the logical extension of the work that had been done in the early, let's say, days of the 21st century, not just by Michael, but also by people like, for instance, Penny Cook and a number of others, numerous others, in fact, Su Gao, in deconstruct, or at least inquiring into this monstrously unified notion of language, and the idea of German, all right, or Swahili, which sociolinguistically makes no sense at all in actual reality. So as soon as you begin to investigate it sociolinguistically, it makes no sense at all.
Yeah, indeed. It is, first, it is great that you also, reference other scholars, because that was like really programmatic. We have, great people, Kathleen Woolard, Susan Gao.
Oh yeah.
Judith Irvine.
I could have mentioned 50 people easily.
Yeah, the whole day here, mentioning the people, which is good, because it's really teamwork, and we're gonna go back to teamwork at the end of our interview. So you pointed this like really interesting thing about what gets easily discarded, in logical analysis, say the, actual resources that go along, with languages, a system as reference. And I want to, connect this to my next question, which has to do with, digitalization and all the new resources that, have increasingly become part of our interaction. So an important lesson that I have learned by reading your pieces, and also I want to mention my colleague here, Leticia Cesarino, is that we should do away with traditional discourse analysis. Let's say, if you want to come to terms with what's going on, in the world, yeah, by saying, getting away with, discarding, I really mean like refining what, we received. For instance, in Leticia's work, she shows that the idea of context collapse is fundamental to understanding, for example, what Bolsonaro and his team are doing in democracy in Brazil. So the architecture of, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp are designed in ways that the multiple recontextualizations of a message ultimately make it impossible to pin down, where it was like originally produced. So context collapses. And then you see the collapse also between the context of boundaries, of categories like private and public, politician and influencer, etc., which is, a phenomenon that is afforded by the engineering of social media. So first question that I would like to ask you about this is, what does it mean to do discourse analysis in social media?
I think it hides a bigger problem, and the bigger problem is our sociological imagination about communication. So let me put it this way: we, since the beginning of the 21st century, we have a new set of forms of communication. They are really new. There were no computers, or at least no interacting computers prior to a certain moment in history, right? So there is really new stuff. We have old and established ways of addressing communication, like discourse analysis. But we should never forget that most of, well, all of discourse analytic theories are grounded in the realities of communication before there was online like interaction, before social media, before Bolsonaro, right? And as a consequence, the problem of discourse analysis, I think, is bigger than we imagine, because it is grounded in a sociological imagination, an imagination of how society actually works and operates and is built, all right, which is obsolete, which refers to a reality which is offline. And so before we can start working on a decent new, discourse analysis, we will have to rebuild our sociological imagination first, all right, and realize, for instance, that the model of communication, the dominant model of communication that we're now using, all right, is not a speaker and a hearer. Like all of us were trained, on the basis of Saussure in our first year of linguistics training. No. There's a speaker, there's a machine, and there's a hearer. And then there's another machine and another hearer and another machine and another hearer, right? What do we do with that machine? We know that the machine is not latent. It is not just there, as a simple piece of material artifact. No. It deeply influences how we communicate, who we communicate with, right, and what it is we communicate. It is this machine, so these algorithms, we have words for it, these algorithms that now create the distinctions, plural, between the private spheres and the public spheres. It is these machines, these algorithms that create identities like the influencer, but that also create meaning effects that we've never seen before, like a virality, okay, stuff going viral. It's not just Mr. Bolsonaro who makes stuff going viral. No, there are people who can make sure that the messages that he produces will never go viral. All right. So how do we maneuver these new realities of communication in a discourse analysis, which is no longer just about, the talking heads that we had before, no longer just about, a conversation, all right, a real-time, real-life, offline conversation. That's the real work that we will have to do. You guys will have to do it. I won't be there to do it, but it's quite an agenda. Let me tell you, it's quite an agenda. It's rethinking a society on the basis of new evidence we get from new forms of communication. And so we are the ones who have the hard evidence. We are the ones who have the smoking guns of a changing society.
Yeah, I should point out that you have been doing this and you are really, setting the ground for it. We won't have time to unpack it, but all your work, like online with Garfunkel, and your rereading of, given sociological background in this direction of the, online offline nexus is, one of the directions. So I really, suggest this work to our viewers. So would like now to pick one specific work that you did. This amazing analysis of Donald Trump's speech action on Twitter. In your paper about Trump's Twitter poetics, you discuss his cunning use of intextualization, from text to talk and vice versa. Could you, give us a few words on that?
Yeah, at one point, one of the things that I observed was that everyone knows that he is a president who communicates through tweets. Now, tweets are specific speech forms, and again, entirely new, right? So, highly constrained, and there are many rules in the world of tweeting, and there's no way you can violate them because the machine will say no, it's too long or whatever. This doesn't work. And so what he does is he uses his tweets in relation to the spoken word. For instance, he's giving an offline rally in Richmond, Virginia. Okay, and during this rally, he will also tweet. Now, clearly, it's not him who tweets; it's a team of professional people who do that for him. I think that's very clear for everyone to understand. But the interesting thing is that the stuff he says offline, all right, is mimicked, if you wish, in the tweet. And so the tweet, for instance, by means of, it's almost identical in what it says, the words it uses, but also its uses of, for instance, uppercase and exclamation marks, great, big, bad, the enemies of the people, phrases like that are highlighted and are given in usually uppercase. Now those are speaking instructions, all right? So what he does is he's talking in Richmond, Virginia, in front of an audience, right? And what the tweet gang does is it reproduces it for millions of other people in identical ways, in such ways that when they speak these words, they produce them exactly like Mr. Trump does, right? So his tweeting behavior becomes vastly more than just shouting or announcing or reiterating stuff he's already said somewhere. It becomes a learning environment for how to talk like me, all right? And if I succeed in making you talk like me, all right, we shall have made America great again.
Yeah, that's it's amazing. It's really, interesting work, and I think it illuminates, what's going on. These messages that are meant, to be recontextualized, to be, cited in ways that are completely novel because of
Absolutely, yeah.
of the
Yeah, and so you begin to see how we are challenged by fundamentally new stuff here. Eh? So this kind of intertextuality has never been available. It's never been around. Twitter has never been. The history of Twitter is, I think, 15 years old. Not older than that. Look what it has become.
Mhm.
How it certainly within the political field, how it is Twitter that basically defines the core vocabulary for all of us, or for many of us, for how to talk about politics. And through it, how to talk about the climate, how to talk about refugees, how to talk about fascism, how to talk about racism, and so on and so on and so on. All right. So this is the richness of the period in which we now live. As a linguist, an applied linguist, a discourse analyst, social linguist, whatever you want to be called, those are golden days, because on an almost weekly basis you begin to see new stuff here, and marvelous new applications, that create entirely new forms of footing, new forms of opportunity for using visual material, adjacently or alongside, with spoken stuff and so on and so on. It's crazy. Those are crazy times, and we will have to keep up with it.
Yeah, so and it's with this same enthusiasm that I want to, approach the end of our interview, and I have just one, final question to ask you, and it's about, the creation of a healthy, and solidarity academia. You have written and talking about the importance of teamwork, especially teamwork that goes beyond one's, little box, one's department, and that centers on discussing ideas, on promoting cutting edge work by, creating real forums for actual critique. And as I'm sure that there are many junior scholars out there, watching this, what would you have to say to them about, this importance of teamwork and academic solidarity in the current moment?
Yeah, and why don't we use an even bigger word here, academic democracy? An academic environment in which the production of knowledge, which in itself should be the most democratic commodity, right, should never be, in actual fact, a commodity at all. It should never be marketized. It should be the big asset for humankind, for humanity, right? And we produce it as professionals. So for me, it's all about finding ways of being democratic. And if we do that, we need to start from, or at least, there are very numerous levels where work needs to begin. The most important forum, of course, is the forum in which we ourselves are being created, in which we ourselves are being made into a market. We are made into a bunch of people who are like fighting each other, in competition with each other. Am I the best? Am I the strongest? Am I the first? Right? Is my stuff more often cited than your stuff? All right. Do more people come to my lectures than to yours? Now, all of this is utterly and absolutely unimportant when you think about knowledge. But of course, it dominates our daily practices almost wherever I go in the world, because of the the industrialization of the academic world. We need to fight that. And we need to go for a democratic environment in the university itself. So it starts with us stopping or refusing to play the game in which we fight each other and in which we see each other as competitors. We are always interlocutors in a very, very big dialogue, a dialogue about knowledge, and that it's a particular dialogue. It's a weird sort of dialogue in the sense that it has multiple rules, and we call it science. Okay, so these rules make it into science. All right, that's our field, that's where we are. We need to start there. Now, on the other end of the line, there is output. And a lot of what I have been really upset about over the past number of years, decades actually, is the way in which academic writing, so the stuff we produce, the books, the journal articles, and so on, have been extracted from democratic environments and made into ultra elitist products, super expensive products. They are, books are more expensive, academic books are more expensive, if you wish, than handbags made by Gucci. Okay, in a world where, what we do, the production of science, increasingly makes a difference between living and dying. Think about the climate. Also think about racism, sexism, and what have you in society, right? The conditions of life are being created by science, or at least they should be co-created by science. But that can only happen when we go open access, when we ourselves are democratic in our output. And there are various ways in which we could do that. I've written about it. Don't be afraid of breaking the rules there as well. You're not breaking the rules at all when you're democratic in spreading your stuff to as many people as there are, interested in your work. You're not violating any rule there. You're following the rules of science. You're being very scientific by being democratic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I was thinking of, the very, metaphor of using, so if I give you 10 euros, I don't have those 10 euros anymore. But if I give you an idea, I still have the idea. And what more? I have a more refined idea because we changed, communication and
exactly
built indexicality, etc. So,
exactly. Yeah. And what attracted me to academia many years ago, and I'm sure it also attracted you into academia, was exactly the collegiality, the fact that literally nothing was done alone. You never worked alone. You were always, surrounded by groups of other people who were almost by definition interested in what you did. And not only that, remember that we started the interview by a reference to reading. This is one of the key aspects of our job. In a way, we are professional readers. We read, right? We have to read. And we have to cite and quote and reference, right? Meaning we have to create a community around our own ideas. We are absolutely forced to do that, all right? Because here again is one of these key rules that makes a distinction between an ordinary, an opinion, all right, and a piece of science. It's discipline. And where do we get the discipline from? It's from this community who has done the work before us, who has given us examples, right? Good examples as well as very bad ones, right? But has provided us with the the big sort of directions that make it easy for us, to get started, because we just need to join in. And we already have a road and we can start traveling. It's good to remember that the moment you read something in view of your article or book, that article or book is no longer like single authored. It's collective. It's made by you and by the author of the book or article that you were reading. It's good to keep that in mind.
Yes, I'm sure. One of the many great lessons, today. Jan, thank you a lot, for your time, for your enthusiasm, for even in this harsh moment, being so generous. This is definitely your mark, and that's, what is outstanding for us here in Brazil.
It's also, Daniel, probably the last time I speak publicly. And I'm happy to be able to do it for you guys in Brazil.
Yeah, thank you.
For me being a first world scholar, who's always worked and lived and been able to draw upon the resources of a very well-resourced environment. This is an aspect of being democratic as well. So for me, it closes the circle. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. So be well, and we'll keep in touch. Thank you.